Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to look at PostgreSQL cursors. I'm going to show you how to select data, update data, and delete. Comments below, I have pinned a message from Software Nuggets that contains the create table and the insert statement. Please get that and let's perform these two tasks. So we're going to create our table called department, and we'll be using that throughout this video. So create it. Let's perform the insert statement. And then let's check it out, see what we have. And you can see here we have 10 rows of data. Let's give a little background information for a cursor. Now we're using version 14 of PostgreSQL. So to declare an object, we're always talking about the data type called refcursor. And so we have to open up a refcursor, and then we have to fetch. Now a fetch has a direction. A direction could be like first, last, next, prior, forward, reverse, or relative. Now I'll give examples of each of these, so don't worry about that. And so that's the fetch clause. And then we say close. But this open and close is so important. Without those two, none of this works. Now on line 14, you can see I have a basic template going for just our function. And what we're going to do now is just make this so we can work with a cursor. So notice after we say $, which kind of like, begins our source code, we're going to say declare. And what are we going to declare? Well, we're going to declare one of these ref cursors. So we say C1 ref cursor. And then we're going to say T row. That's our individual row. And the name of the table that we'll be using is that department table. So department, and then the % symbol, and then you say row type, and then semicolon. So here are our two variables that we're going to need. Now what we do is when we get into this begin to end, that's a block of code. What we need to say is open C1. C1 is our cursor that we defined here on 19. And then we're going to say, like what do we want? So we're going to say for select star from department. Now, rather than executing this select statement, select star from departments all at once, like executing and gives it back, we are setting up a cursor that will read that query as few lines as possible. So we will do like a loop and have individual access to individual lines instead of it all coming back at me, as one big old result. Now, after we use the open statement, that is when we use fetch. Now, fetch is all about this directions. Let me copy this down here. So remember what I just said. We are going to try to get as few rows as possible because we're in a cursor. We want individual row management. We're going to do something with that. So how do we do that? Well, we use a command called fetch, and we say fetch. And then notice it says here direction. Well, the direction could be first, last, next, prior, forward, reverse, or relative. So on this first one, we'll just say, go ahead and fetch me the first row. Now, remember, that's coming from the cursor. I haven't gotten all the data back from the table. I'm just going out and getting the first row. And then we say from our cursor name, which was C1, and then we're going to say into. And what are we going to put it into? Well, we're going to put it into a T row. Now, for every open command, we need to close command. And what we do is we say close C1. That actually closes the cursor. And that's a perfect thing because we declare a variable, like we set up here on line 4. We open it, line 5. We fetch, line 11, and then we close it. Now, in a little bit, I'm going to show you actually how to loop over a cursor, but this is where it all begins. Let's see how this one will play out. Do you see in our output window we have 3 tabs: data output, messages, and notifications. Well, in messages, if we say raise, notice, and then some message, we can actually write messages into this tab. So notice here I'm going to say raise, notice, start, and then raise, notice, finish. So here's, I'm starting it, I'm finishing. Let's put one more after this fetch first so we can actually see the row that was read from our database file. Notice I added a line on line 31. I said raise notice first. I'm just showing you that is my direction on my fetch. And then percent are placeholders. Notice I'm adding trow.department ID and trow.department name. Make sure you end that with a semicolon. Let's now build this. See if we got blue star. Okay, that was great. And now we're going to execute this. Notice the name of this function is called show all departments. So I'm going to copy that down, paste it here, and then let's execute. And press on. So you see we got our start, we get first, one, executive, and then finish. So you can see here, we got the first row out of this table at a very granular extraction. I didn't go and get all the data. I just told this cursor kind of like what I want to do. This fetch is what we're going to do to go get the data. I think you get it now. Let's proceed. So we have the same statements, but now notice on line 17, we have changed the fetch command. Notice it used to say fetch direction from C1 into that row. Notice I'm not using a direction now. So that means one of these directions are the default direction type. And I'm going to let you guess which one it is. If you were thinking next, that's exactly what it is. So me not typing in next or typing in next, that is the default direction. I can execute this fetch command on line 17, and this will fetch the first row from the cursor. Remember, the cursor does not contain all the results from the select command we requested on line 14. Let us build, and then let us execute. And what we're going to be expecting is that first row. Let's go to messages. And then notice we got executive ID 1. So next, we'll get the first record. Now notice I removed the direction so we know the default is next, and I put the same statement underneath it. So this should get us 1, this should get us 2. Let's build this and see how that works. Let's execute this. I'll show you the output. Notice we got 1 executive, 2 finance. Let us look at one more option we can use before we get into loops. We can use a command called move. Now move is a little bit different than fetch. You'll notice that when we say fetch, it actually goes and gets data. Move only repositions us to the row that we want. So we can say reposition relative 3 from C1. So this right here will put our cursor in position 3. So it's like we're not going to read row 3. We will just reposition the pointer to be on row 3. Now, if we wanted row 3, we'd actually have to say 2 because next would get row 3. So notice here, move relative 3 from C1. Now when I do this next command, fetch from C1, this should pick up 4. So when we get the output here, the department ID should be 4 and 5. Let's see if that's true. Let us build this, and it created. Let's execute it, and let's see our messages. And notice we have 4 and 5. So move relative 3 doesn't read 3, but puts us there. But when we say fetch next from C1, it actually gets row 4. And there we have kind of like a loop all in one line. Now we're going to loop over data and see how this works. Let us look at doing looping now. Notice on line 16 we say loop. For every loop we have an end loop. Make sure you put that semicolon at the end there. Then notice here on 14, we open our cursor. Remember, opening it doesn't go get the data. It just tells this cursor app, hey, we want all of the data from department. Now notice we're saying fetch next from C1, and we're going to put that into T-row. Then notice here, we're going to say raise notice found, and I'm going to be printing out found. Well, what is found? Well, found is a special variable that checks to see whether or not the row was obtained or not. After we do this, if there is no more data, this will be set to false, and then we can get out of here. As long as it's true, we stay inside of this loop. So that is how we use the variable found. So I keep looping around that. I check to see if found is true, and then I print a message. Then I come back up, I get the next element from the cursor. I print this out, I test to see if found is good, and then I just stay inside of this loop until we're done. Let us build this and see how this will work. Show you the messages and see what happens. So notice I started, and then I said found is true, and then I print one executive, and then notice I come back up here, I fetch the next one, found is true, found is true. Notice I get all the way down. On the very last one, remember we only have 10 rows, we say found is true, and then as it comes out of 10 and goes back up to fetch the next record, because see when I said select star, I don't know how many rows there are. I don't know if there's 1 or 100 or 1,000,000. But what I do know is I'm going to keep looping until we're done. But what happens is when it does line 17, found will be set to false. And as soon as I hit line 21, we're out of the loop. And then we close the cursor. And then I print out finished, just as you see inside of messages here. In our previous example, we went from 1 to 10. This time I want to go from 10 to 1. I want to go backwards. Now we have to do one thing a little different. We have to say open C1. C1 was our ref cursor, but now we have to say the word scroll. It's a keyword, and it's going to allow us to go backwards. But before I get inside my loop, I need to position it correctly. Remember, next would go get the first record. We have to somehow change the dynamics just a little bit. So what we have to do is fetch last from C1 into T-row. When we say fetch, that actually gets the row. So what we got to do is we got to move this. Now that will come into this thing and say, hey, it's found, true or false. And then if it's false, I'm going to get out of here. And then look at here, I'm going to raise that notice, and notice that will be last. And then guess what I do here? I say fetch prior from C1 into T-row. Now, what that does is it gets, I was on the last row 10, now I get 9. I come back up here and I say, hey, was 9 found? If it wasn't, let's get out of here. Else, print 9, 8, 7, 6, I think you see it. So the only thing new in this one right here is scroll, and then I had to change the way we're doing the looping. I had to go and reposition and then change the order on how I would do that. Let's run this and see how that works. Build this, and notice that was successful. And then we are going to come down here and show all, check out our output, and then notice we are at 10 down to 1, and then found as false. And that is how you go in reverse. In this example, we're going to use a cursor to update one of these departments randomly if the department ID is odd. So this is a kind of complicated use of a cursor, but in reality, this is what a cursor is used for, to do complex things. So we're going to randomly select a department ID, and then if its value modulus 2 is 1, it's odd, we're going to set this value over here to false, and we're going to update this mod date to the current date and time. Let's begin. Let's open up a cursor for the select statement. We need to randomly get rows. So you say open C1 for, now what are we going to say here? Select department ID, department name, and on site from department. Now watch this right here. Order by random. And then we're going to say fetch first 3 rows only. Now, I'm going to execute this so you can just kind of see what happens. Notice it goes out there and gets me randomly 3 rows. So it has 4, 5, and 2. Now, if I execute that again, what do we get? 6, 2, 4, 1, 3, 2. So you see randomly it's getting the data. Now, this program will say, if this value is odd, like for instance, all of these are odd, then I'm going to set this value to false. Does that make sense? So this is my select statement. I'm building a cursor. And then we'll loop over this cursor. If this value is odd, I'm going to set this to false. Let's do it. So you know the next step. Now we have opened our cursor. Now we need to say loop. And for every loop, we end loop. And make sure you put a semicolon there. Now we're going to say fetch next from, what is the name of our cursor? C1. And then we're going to say into, what is the name of our row type? Our row type is trow. And then we know that this can fail. So how do we get out of here? Well, we say exit when not found. In the last example, I showed you that found is a special variable and is based on whether or not this was successful or not. So we're going to get out of there. Now is when we get into the fun programming. We say if trow dot department ID modulus 2 equals 1, then if it does equal 1, that means it's odd. And then what are we going to do? Well, we're going to say update department set onsite equal false, and then I have to set that date to be like now. So mod date equals now. Now where are you going to do that on? I'm going to say where the department ID equals trow dot department ID. So that's going to update that table, and I'm going to stay inside of this loop until I get the 3 items processed, and then we're out of here. And then we can execute this method. So the name of this is called update onsite randomly. All right, let's give this a whirl, see if this works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the data first, and then notice everything is true, okay? And then I'm going to say select star from, okay, so now this will execute. And then I'm going to do my messages. And then notice it looked like only 7 was used that time. Is that pretty cool? Now, if we run this again, it's possible that another set is shown. And notice they were all true on that one. And then let's do it again. So you see now we're at 7 and 9. So randomly, we were able to update our table using a cursor in PostgreSQL. Let's now write a cursor that deletes. So notice it's called delete when false. So this is the basic structure of our cursor. So we just now have to just do our open, fetch, do something, and close. So how do we do that? We say open, the name of our cursor is C1 for select star from department. All right, cool. And now we're going to do our loop statement. So it's a loop, and for every loop, there's an end loop and a semicolon. And then you know that for every open, we have a close. So we need to say close C1. Okay, that should work. Now we have to be smart about this looping. So the first thing we have to do is we have to fetch. So fetch next from C1 into trow. I think this is all starting to look familiar to you now. So now after we do that fetch, you know we need to test for found. So we're going to say exit when not found. Now is where we do our testing to see if we can even delete any rows from our cursor. So we're going to say if trow dot department ID mod 2 equals 1, then for every if you have an end if. Now if indeed that department ID mod 2 is 1, that means it's odd, then we're going to check that on site. So then we're going to say if trow dot on site equals false, then for every if we have an end if. Then we're just going to do our command delete. So it's delete from, what's the name of our table? Department. And then where department ID equals trow dot department ID. Now, I guess we could maybe show a little help. Does anybody remember how to do that? That's right, raise. So raise, notice, And we can say something like has been deleted, and percent, those are placeholders, and then we'll say trow.department ID, and I guess we could do the onsite, trow.onsite. And let me see, if and if, loop and loop, open, close. Okay, that's the way it's done. Now let's go look at our data and let's kind of start over. So I'm gonna drop all the data. I'm gonna recreate the table, and we are going to have just the basic data. Let's see what that looks like. So notice we're all back to truths. Now, once we start looking at this, we can say, okay, here's all the data, and notice everything is true. Now, remember our randomizer? Let's see if we can randomize and select some odd. So I just ran it. Let's run department now. And notice, oh, look at this, 7 and 5 have been set to false. So now when I run delete when false, these two, 7 and 5, should be removed. Ready? Let's do it. Okay, what do we get for messages? Oh, look at that, 7 and 5 have been deleted. Let's prove that. 7 and 5 have been deleted. We did it. So you've seen how to get data, update data, and delete data, all using a cursor. You're now ready to start using this in a test environment. Once you get real good, let's roll it out to production. You've got another skill under your belt now. That's the PostgreSQL cursor. This was just an introduction to this very useful tool. You'll need to practice using this feature. So in this video, I will show you how to do several things like build a cursor, loop over a cursor, update the underlying database, and delete. And that's all I have for this video. If you have any questions, please leave them below. I'll see you back in my next video. Take care.